Yes folks, we are soon getting a new medium format camera with a new 247 megapixel sensor made by Sony. That's 100% certain, and today I want to talk about the specs of this new sensor and also give you the idea what kind of camera to expect. But before that, a quick reminder to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button to not miss any of the upcoming rumors. It's official folks, Sony just listed a brand new sensor on the Sony Semicon website. You can check it out, and there you see the new 247 megapixel medium format sensor. And this is not a cropped medium format sensor like the one used by the Fuji GFX or the Hasselblad X2D cameras. This is a proper large medium format sensor made for cameras like the Hasselblad H6D or the Phase One Eco 4 digital back cameras. This new sensor is listed on the industrial Sony sensor page, not on the Sony camera page, but that's normal because Sony does list a medium format sensor under the industrial page. You can see it, for example, also on the 102 megapixel sensor that is in use on the GFX 100 or the Hasselblad X2D2. It's also listed as an industrial sensor. And what's very important to know is that every medium format sensor that Sony has listed on that page is being used on a real medium format camera from Phase One, Hasselblad or Fuji. So if they listed that new 247 megapixel sensor, it means they have a customer, they have someone that wants to use it, and the sensor actually has some quite unique specs compared to the other medium format sensors. Mainly, one, it's a backside illuminated sensor, so a real modern sensor with real modern tech used on all full frame cameras that are now available in the recent years. Moreover, this sensor now has a 3:2 aspect ratio, not a 4:3 aspect ratio. This is quite a big change and unusual change. I don't know why they are doing this. My guess is that the 3:2 sensor is more ideal if you want to shoot video. The next very interesting info is that it has 16-bit output, so it has a very high quality backside illuminated sensor. And what did surprise me is that it shoots 5 frames per second with a huge amount of data. So at full 16-bit, 247 megapixel. 5 frames per second for me is fast enough for 99% of the shooting. So unless you're a wildlife photographer, sports photographer, the 5 frames are by no means a limitation. And anyway, if you want to shoot faster, you can just downscale from 16-bit to 14-bit and you will be able to shoot at 10 frames per second, and at 12-bit you will shoot 12 frames per second. And the next interesting info is that there are actually 2 different versions of that sensor, one with color information and one monochrome. The monochrome sensor will have an extra bit of sharpness and less artifacts because it uses every single pixel without interpolation, while the color sensor has to interpolate between the RGB pixels. So if you want to have the ultimate image quality, although in black and white, then you can use that monochrome sensor on a monochrome camera. I would be definitely interested to see if this is going to happen and who is going to make it, maybe Hasselblad, Phase One or even Sony one day. That would be intriguing. But now let's compare this new sensor with the other medium format sensors and full frame sensors to see how much larger it is, what's the crop factor and so forth. I made a quick table that is quite accurate. You can see here a classic 4:3 aspect ratio sensor used by the Hasselblad H6D or the Phase One Eco 4. The newly announced Sony sensor has a different aspect ratio, and that's the size comparison. The height is 4mm less, but it's a half a millimeter wider than the Hasselblad or Phase One sensors we saw before. Now let's compare it with the medium format sensor used by the Fuji GFX cameras and the Hasselblad X2D, and you can see that medium format sensor is quite a bit smaller. The new Sony 247 megapixel sensor has an area that is 32% larger than the one used by the Fuji and Hasselblad cameras, and when you compare the new 247 megapixel sensor size with full frame, you can see that it's actually 124% larger than full frame. So this is quite a massive sensor. The crop factor is 0.667, which means that a 50mm lens made for that large sensor size would compare with a 33mm focal length in full frame terms, and a 2.8 aperture on the large Sony sensor would compare with a 1.7 aperture on full frame. So now you learned the key data of the new sensor, but the real big question now is who is going to make a camera using that new sensor. The most likely hot candidates are Phase One and Hasselblad. I can see them announcing a new camera with a new sensor earliest in late 2024, more likely in 2025. Usually, I saw that in the past when Sony announced a new medium format sensor, it took up to 1 year before a manufacturer announced a camera using that new sensor. So it's not something that is going to happen soon, and those are the most likely candidates. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed that Sony will really do a medium format camera using that one sensor. I think there's a market for it. I think Sony should do it. And actually, my wish is it's not a plain dream. There are some evidences that Sony is working on a medium format camera, at least on paper, because in the past years they did patent a couple of new lenses made for medium format cameras. So at least engineers are designing and exploring the idea of having a medium format system camera from Sony, but this is only a patent, so by far no proof that they will really do it. In some of those patents, Sony actually did show some lenses made for a curved sensor medium format camera, so this is another step in another direction. It has nothing to do with that one sensor, but Sony, we know they are working and exploring the idea of having a curved sensor, which would allow to have a lens design that is 1/3 more compact compared to lens designed for flat sensors. So you would have a medium format camera with lenses that are actually nearly the size as full frame. That would be amazing, but I don't think we are going to see a Sony curved sensor anytime soon. First of all, I didn't get any hint from trusted sources that this is going to happen, and second, yes, Sony did patent those ideas, but I think those sensors are very costly to manufacture and also challenging to manufacture. So if Sony will ever do a medium format camera in the next 1-2 years, they are going to use that one sensor for sure. So the 247 megapixel 3:2 aspect ratio sensor. And to give you a visual idea how big a Sony camera should be to fit that large sensor, I made a comparison between the Sony a9 III full frame camera. I did upscale the mount so that it fits that new sensor, and you can see the mount is nearly as high as the camera itself. And if you would upscale the Sony a9 III to that size, it would become that big. Of course, that's an exaggeration. In reality, the camera will be much smaller. It doesn't have to be as big in all the parts and wide and height. To wrap it up, Sony once more shows they are leading in the sensor market. They announced that 247 megapixel backside illuminated sensor with 3:2 aspect ratio, 16-bit, 5 frames per second, so an excellent, stunning sensor, and I'm sure that Hasselblad and Phase One will make a camera using that sensor. The one hope that I have is that Sony will also make such a camera. I know it would become expensive. For example, the Hasselblad is priced at over $30,000, but I think Sony could probably make a camera for less than $30,000, around $20,000 using that sensor. My suggestion for Sony would be that they make a fixed lens medium format camera with that sensor, just to see how well it would be received by the market and see if they make enough sales, just like they did, for example, with the RX full frame camera that was announced over 1 year before the first full frame E-mount camera. So it would be nice to test the market, launching a fixed lens model that is still compact, not too big compared to the Fuji GFX 100. And maybe if they make enough sales, they will go one step further and make a new medium format interchangeable system camera using that large, fast, crazy megapixel sensor. I would love to get it. I know it would be an expensive toy, but it would be something new. And from what I learned in the past years, when I see the market, how it's moving, I see that people are actually willing to spend a lot of money on something that is different than other products, that gives you an edge in terms of image quality or other aspects. So I think there's a market for that, and Sony should definitely go for it. So folks, now let me know in the comment system what you think about that new sensor, if you think that Sony should really do a medium format camera or not, and I will give you an update as soon as I have more info about the possible new Sony patents regarding new medium format cameras and lenses, or if sources will finally tell me yes, that Sony is developing a new medium format camera and we can expect it probably in 2025. That would be amazing. So stay tuned on this channel, like this video as usual to help in the YouTube algorithm, subscribe if you haven't done it so far, and see you soon folks.